Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Leroy, Executive Director of Coastal Community Foundation's Venture Philanthropy Program, Social Venture Partners Charleston. I'm excited to see, virtually anyway, so many of you here today. And I'm grateful for Megan Stifel and Shehzad Mirza from the Global Cyber Alliance, who are going to provide great content throughout this webinar and will be accessible to folks afterwards as well. You'll have their contact information. Feel free to reach out to them for any additional questions or accessing their toolkit, which they'll talk about today. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the question box or the chat box. And if and when relevant during the presentation, we'll ask you'll have the opportunity for those questions to be answered. If not, they will be answered at the end. And as usual, we really appreciate everyone being here with us today and hope that you get a lot out of it, and would love to hear your feedback. So please complete the survey. It's really brief that you'll get shortly after the webinar. We're recorded, so we'll also send out a link to this as well so that you can share with colleagues who may not have been able to join us today. With that, I will introduce Megan Stifel and let her take it from here. Megan, it's all you.
Thanks, Laura. Good afternoon. Thanks, everyone. My name is Megan Stifel. I'm the Executive Director for the Americas region at the Global Cyber Alliance, and I want to say thanks especially to Laura and Gloria for inviting us to chat with you all this afternoon. I don't think I know many of you, but there are a few familiar faces in the audience. As some of you may know, then my family and I moved to Charleston 6 years ago following a long time in government and the private sector in Washington, D.C., and I am a partner in Social Venture Partners Charleston. So we're particularly thankful that we had the opportunity to chat. So a little bit about the Global Cyber Alliance before I turn it over to Shehzad. GCA is a 5-year-old international nonprofit organization. We were founded by 2 law enforcement agencies and a cybersecurity best practices nonprofit called the Center for Internet Security. The 2 law enforcement agencies are the Manhattan District Attorney, so Cy Vance is the current Manhattan District Attorney, and he was one of the co-founders, as well as the City of London Police, which is the police department that protects this financial capital of London, not to be confused with the Met Police. Our mission was and is to reduce cyber risk globally, and we do that by uniting global communities, scaling solutions, and then measuring their impact. Since our founding in 2015, we've grown to over 200 partners in 30 countries around the world, and our partners include other nonprofits, industry, governments, and academia. The way that we scale our solutions is by making cybersecurity accessible to all by supporting free resources and training people on how to use them, which brings me to why we're here today. Our goal with this presentation is to equip you with resources to better secure your organizations and yourselves. Contrary to what you might feel or hear in the news, cybersecurity doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. The resources we're going to share with you this afternoon are free. The investment that you need to make is time. We hope that after you hear the conversation this afternoon, you will understand why it's an investment you cannot afford not to take. So with that, over to Shehzad. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. So we're going to talk about different, like Megan said, we're going to talk about different aspects of our not only our toolkit, but the things that you need to focus on when it comes to cybersecurity and dealing with cyber risk and cyber hygiene within your environment. So we're not necessarily going to cover every single aspect of it. We're going to cover the important items, so that way at least you have somewhere to start and somewhere to get, to focus on when you go back after you hear everything today. So first thing we're going to talk about is cyber risk and cyber hygiene. So the goal here is to, explain again, what is it? Why is it important to worry about cyber risk? And the idea here is that this is where you need to take a look at your business and see what are the risks that could occur within your environment if your systems were to go down, right? If your laptop stopped working, or if your servers stop working, or if your website, if you're selling things on a website, what happens if those go down? Because not only is it going to disrupt your business, but it could also lead to things like financial loss, right? If there is something wrong with your website and it's selling the wrong information or displaying wrong information, there could be legal and liability issues or reputational damage that it could occur to your business. So when it comes to cyber risk, it can come from anywhere, right? Because you're online, right? So anyone can find information about how to conduct online fraud or attack regardless of their skills or technical knowledge. You don't have to have technical knowledge. You just find the right location or find the right person, and they're the ones who can do what needs to get done or conduct whatever online fraud that they're trying to do. And since systems are being more and more connected, right? So there's more and more information that's available, right? It's not just laptops and computers and mobile devices anymore, right? It's going to be refrigerators. It's going to be your coffee pot in some cases. Those things are now being connected, so people can find out things about just those types of items and try to break into those types of items just to see what's going on or what they can get access to. So these attack vectors will at that point increase. And then the goal is really to steal that data. And they want to take that data and either use it to go and do further attacks or sell that data, sell that information, right? And in some cases, we'll talk a little bit about ransomware, and you may have heard of ransomware, right? Where they're keeping your data your data hostage and demanding some level of money back or Bitcoins back, so that way they can, make a profit out of it. So there's financial gain at that point. So these are risks that you need to understand and see what are in your environment, because there are different types of attackers that go from no skill set to major skill sets, right? Because you just have to find out what's going on, like script kiddies, for example. Script kiddies are someone who they find a script or something that's already done. They just have to press a button or step through a wizard to answer a few questions, and then it goes out and does that particular type of attack that they're looking to do. There's financially motivated attackers, right? Those are the people who want the credit card data. They want your tax information. They want your banking account information. They want your health records. They want to do something where they can take that information and monetize it or potentially use it against you in some way. There's hacktivists, so people who are actually looking to get into your networks, into your mail systems and your websites, or onto whatever servers they can get access, but it's more politically or socially motivated, right? So they're going to use your email systems to send out email about some sort of political or social activity. They can, on your website, they'll deface your website and post some sort of political statement or socially motivated statement on there. And then there's nation states, right? These are where different countries are now looking to do some sort of strategic attacks to get their goals, right? So, this is where you may hear a lot more on the news, like a lot more cyber attacks coming from other nations. They're weaponizing it, right? And things like that. But overall, for small businesses and really any type of level of business, this cyber risk has reached epidemic proportions. So 58% of all cyber attacks have targeted small businesses. And in 2018, the global cost of cybercrime is estimated to be about $6 billion US. So, and this is not just one country, right? This is the United States. This is going to be the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and so on. All of these countries that have small businesses or micro businesses, they are going to be attacked, right? Because they're small businesses that aren't focused too much on cybersecurity. Their focus is more on making sure that their business strives and their business, gains ground. So there's different aspects you can do, and having good cyber hygiene is a key focus for any good cybersecurity environment, making sure your business thrives. Because a lot of these attacks have commonalities. There's certain things that they all do the same or is similar. And if you just take certain level of actions, you can help protect against those and reduce your cyber risk, right? So a lot of attacks can be initiated by phishing emails. So when you hear on the news, a lot of these previous attacks that occurred with like the World Health Organization, for example, or Target, right? A lot of these started with a phishing email because one user just didn't know or wasn't aware that this was a phishing email. They felt susceptible to it and they clicked on a link or they did something they weren't supposed to do. There's systems that are unpatched, right? Because a phishing email is not just an email coming in, they have to take advantage of something else. Not just, the user clicks on the link, but the link could take advantage of an unpatched system that the person is clicking the link on. There could be some sort of infection associated with it, right? Like ransomware. But overall, the intent, the target, and the impact could be different, but the techniques that are being used are very similar to each other. So it's just a matter of taking the right and good cyber hygiene, simple practices that most of the cases are free and built-in capabilities to the system. You just have to use them and utilize those. Right, so remember, not anyone has to have like an advanced tool to go into these things. You can just go out and buy or rent something or pay somebody to do these services. So the attackers can come from anywhere. So one good hybrid cyber hygiene is to make sure that you update your software. Update your defenses is very important because you need to know what you have, take care, and then update those things that you have. Because that's what cyber criminals are looking for. They're looking for those weaknesses, those flaws in the operating system, in the applications that you're using, and that's what they're taking advantage of. And that's where a lot of these malicious software or viruses, Trojans, and malware, that's what they're trying to take advantage of, right? Not necessarily like, someone clicking on a link. That's initiating the process, but it has to take advantage of something that's underlying as well. Right, and then you'll see on a regular basis, manufacturers and software developers will be releasing these patches or these updates for the operating systems and applications. Right, if you use Microsoft Windows machines, you're probably familiar with Microsoft Patch Tuesday. So the Tuesday of every month is when Microsoft releases their latest updates and patches to their operating systems for Microsoft Office and so on. Because they find these new things, they say, okay, we need to fix these, we need to plug these holes. Let's go ahead and make sure these patches get out to everybody. So it's important to make sure you go through those updates and those patches. Another thing to think about is if third-party suppliers have access to the data within your systems. Do you have consultants? Is there another third-party vendor that you're working with that you're giving access to your data? So make sure you know who those people are, make sure you know what they have access to, and then change those updates, change those permissions and access rights to those people as needed. But then also make sure whatever they're using, they're keeping up to date, and they're staying up to date not only with their systems, but also your own systems, devices, and applications. Right, because one of the things in 2019 was discovered that 60% of breaches were involved with unpatched vulnerabilities. Right, a lot of these ransomware activities, a lot of these malicious activities that occurred in the past were because of vulnerable systems. People did not update their systems for whatever reason. So it's very important that you update those, especially ones that are marked as critical on your system. So you need to protect your assets in order to have a good defense and good cyber hygiene for your organization and protect yourself. So best practices for software updates. For a lot of these operating system applications, you can actually do auto updates, right? Or at least they'll notify you that an update is ready to go. Let us restart the machine so we can apply the update, or let us restart the application so we can apply the update. So make sure you do these, but be careful with them in some cases, especially with the operating system side. Operating system side, you may want to wait a day or two, but not too much longer. Applications, try to update them right away. If you can enable auto update on each of these systems, do so. So that way you don't have to worry about it. It auto updates on its own. You typically at night, the system will reboot, and then now your system is updated. So always keep business and personal devices that you use for work updated, right? So don't just worry about the business, because in most cases, I'm sure you use your smartphones, or you have a tablet that you use for some level of business, or maybe just checking email and things like that. So make sure you enable auto updates, or at least update those systems as often as you can. Another important item for backup and for good cyber hygiene is to have proper backup and recovery. So what are backups? Right, backups is where you're taking copies of information that's on your systems and storing them to a completely separate device. That's your backup. Right, so that way at any point, if your device were to fail or if your device were to go down, you have a backup of that file or folder that you can get into and gain access to and get back up and running, hopefully relatively quickly, and not lose too much time. in case the server were to fail, you can get that server back up and running within a few hours or less than an hour, and you're back in business. Right, and the incidents that you're worrying about when it comes to making sure you have backup are not only cyber attacks, but also natural disasters. Right, if you're in a region where you have a lot of hurricanes or tornadoes or flooding, a lot of constant power outages, you want to have something as a backup to make sure your website is constantly running or continuously running. Right, you need to make sure that your people can get access to whatever they need to access quickly and get up and running as quickly as possible. Right, having backups is actually one of the best mechanisms to have to recover from a ransomware attack, right? Because it's the backup that's going to get you back up and running. So the average global cost of a data breach is $3.92 million US, right? And a lot of these cases, it's because people don't have backups and they can't get their networks up and running back up again, and they have to, at this point, trying to do whatever they can to recover all the data, recover all the information that they've lost, and get back up to wherever they've left off. So any level of downtime caused by data loss and malicious activity can really impact your company, right? If you're a retail store and you're online, you're trying to sell things through your online store. If that store is down for a week, how much money could you have potentially lost because your online store is down, right? If you do business through your email, right? A lot of email communication, which a lot of salespeople tend to do, use email quite often to send information or allow for communication. Then what at that point, right? If you can't send invoices and so on. So how much would it cost your organization if you're unable to trade or use your IT systems for a day? You lost that important proposal that could win the next big contract. You were no longer able to access your customer files, or they were corrupted. You're told they can only get access to information if you paid a ransom. Right? These are things that you have to focus on. But again, like I mentioned, it's not always a cyber attack that's going to cause some of these issues. Some of these could be just natural disasters. It could be someone accidentally deleted a file or a folder that they weren't supposed to delete, and it didn't go into the trash bin, or they empty the trash bin also for whatever reason. But it could be like, computers are just computers. That's what they are. They're going to wear out. The hard disk could fail, right? And if the hard disk fails and you don't have a backup of that hard drive, then you've lost a good amount of information. Or it could be another type of physical attack where your equipment is stolen. Right? How often do you read that USB drives get stolen or laptops get stolen because they were in the back of someone's unlocked car, or they left it in a hotel room and not in a secure location? So it's very critical to have a backup and to try to recover as quickly as possible as you can. So I mentioned ransomware a few times. So ransomware, if you haven't read about it, there's quite a lot of news out there because it's one of the most, it's one of the malware that's the most infectious and has the most impact over the past few years. And what ransomware really does is that someone gets an email or some sort of attachment, they click on it, open the attachment, and the next thing they know, their machine is completely locked out. And they may have some sort of logo, or they may have some sort of little note there that says, if you send X amount of dollars or X amount of Bitcoins to this location, we will unlock your device or give you the key to unlock your device. Right? And in some cases, that ransomware isn't always localized to one machine. It can spread to other machines as well. So things like CryptoLocker, right? Notice how it exploited a vulnerability in Windows operating systems. WannaCry exploited a vulnerability in Windows operating systems. Had these locations or institutions actually updated or patched their systems, they may never have gotten or been infected by these ransomware. So it is very tempting to go ahead and just pay the ransom and get the information back in quick, but the general advice is not to pay the ransomware. Because the thing is, if you have your backup, that's all they're doing is, right? They're just blocking you from accessing your machine. All you have to do is now take that machine, wipe the machine, clean it, reinstall the operating system, make sure it's fully patched, right? Don't miss any patches, get everything patched, install your applications, make sure all of your applications are fully patched, and then restore from the backup. Restore all your files and folders from the backup. And then at that point, you should be back up and running again. Just remember too, there's also two types of backups. There's offline backups. An offline backup is basically you're taking your backup and putting onto like an external drive. So like a USB drive, or you've connected a hard drive to your laptop via USB. But then you're going to take that particular external drive and keep it separate, keep it stored somewhere securely, right? You know, some people put it into a safe, you know, whatever it is, wherever you store it, just make sure it's secure, but it's also easily accessible for you. Only problem with offline backups is that you know, it's going to be point in time. So it's only going to be backing up as long as you have it plugged in. So if you don't have it plugged in, and you haven't plugged it in for a day or two or three, then there's a potential of losing a couple of days or a couple of hours worth of information. Then there's online backups, and this is where you're basically backing up to the cloud, right? So everything is being stored on the cloud, on a server somewhere off-site, not in your location, but somewhere in a different location, right? Like if, for example, if you're using Google Drive, you can use Google Drive to back up a lot of your files and folders, or there's other backup tools that are out there that you can potentially use. The benefit to this, an online backup, is that most of these online backups will actually do continuous backups. So they'll be backing up as soon as the file has been altered, as long as you have internet connection, as long as once the file's been modified, it automatically backs up that file right away. And it keeps only updating and backing up anything that's been changed, that's been updated or modified. Those are the things that keep getting updated. So that's an advantage of continuous backing up, but you always have to have an internet connection. Right, but as long as if you're down for a while, or if you're traveling, you're working on something and you're on a plane, the idea is that once you get your back on the internet, it automatically backs up those files for you. So those are your two options, and there are different, you know, advantages, disadvantages for each one. Now the key thing is not just do the backup, make sure you can actually recover. Make sure you can restore from that. So it's a good idea is to every so often just test it out. Make sure that your hard drives, your external drives, that you can plug them in. There's no problems. You can access the files on there. Check your online backups as well. Check to see, okay, can I restore? Can I get these files? Can I still see these files? And can I restore them back on my system? So it's a good idea to practice a restoration process every so often. Now, another good tool to use is two-factor authentication. And the reason for this is that passwords are probably the weakest form of authentication when it comes to a lot of systems, right? Because that's one thing that people will always look for. There's going to be a username and there's going to be a password. Those are the two things you need in order to access some sort of system, right? When it comes to email, it typically is your actual email address, right? Or at least the first part of the username before the @ symbol in your email. That's the username. So people already know that half of it. Now they just need to guess the other half, which is the password. And not many people use strong passwords, right? A lot of people actually reuse the same password across multiple accounts, right? You know, is your work email password the same as your Netflix password or your Facebook password? You know, those are questions you want to ask yourself. They shouldn't be, but are they? Right. And the other thing you have to understand is, like, you know, it's become, over time, it's become easier and easier for people to try to crack passwords, right? You know, and that's why you'll keep hearing each time that the minimum character of your password should be this length, and it seems to be increasing over these past few years. And it's just because computer systems, as it gets stronger and faster, it's the same thing. Is when it comes to using tools and password crackers, it becomes faster for them to run those things and to use those. So that's why people will keep saying longer passwords and passphrases and other additional protections to put into place. Because there are various aspects you can do. So like brute force attacks, right? This is where they just have a list of passwords and they just keep hitting that username and just keep changing the password and just going down the list of passwords. Dictionary attacks, right? They're using a dictionary from A to Z. They're using every letter, every word that's in that dictionary, and just going down the list, right? So that's why you shouldn't use like a memorable, you know, you should use something that has special characters and things like that in there. Credential stuffing. So once they got the password for one account, they're going to try using that password for every other account that they think might be associated or you might be trying to use, right? So because if your Netflix username, your Facebook username, your work email, so on are all the same, they're just going to keep using the password across each one of these platforms and hopefully get into whatever they can get into. Phishing emails, right? Someone has logged into your account. If that's incorrect, click here and change your password, or it's time to reset your password. So these are things that are some of the things that can occur. Social engineering, right? That's what phishing is, really. It's social engineering, tricking people to reveal their passwords. They'll go through steps, like on Facebook, for example. Don't answer those questions and those questionnaires that are out there, because those are things that could potentially be used to guess what your password is. So that's what it leads to manual guessing, right? Sometimes it'll try just to do things that are associated with you, right? They figure out maybe a lot of people use their birthdays. They use their kid's birthdays. They use their kid name and the birthday, those kinds of things. So make sure your passwords aren't personal or have really anything to do with you. Shoulder surfing. This is very rare. The chances of this happening are very limited, especially now, because not many people are probably going to coffee shops and typing in their passwords. But just be careful with that. Have a privacy screen on your laptops to make sure that no one can see what you're typing, or you have to look at the right angles in order to actually see what you're doing. And then there's interception. So passwords can be intercepted as they're transmitted over the networks. So this is why it's important that when you're in a location that has that you're not, it's an insecure Wi-Fi connection or something that you don't know or you can't trust, just make sure you use something, like maybe consider using a VPN. Make sure HTTPS is being used, so that way, there's some level of encryption that's occurring and protection when your traffic is being passed from one spot to another spot. But when you're creating strong passwords, right, make sure they are long, complex. And the hard part is when it's longer and more complicated, the harder it's going to be to remember. But if you do it right, you can make some of these memorable, right? So like there's two examples right there. I love birthday cake or To Kill a Mockingbird, right? There's mixing it in with letters and exclamation marks, special characters and numbers and so on. Right, in some cases, so the NCSC is the UK NCSC, they suggest when you're using a passphrase, use 3 memorable words, 3 words, and then just adjust them accordingly. The minimum most people are recommending now are 15 characters in length for your password. You'll still find some places that say 8, but 8 to 15 characters. And when you're in an organization, make sure this is a company-wide policy, okay? There are technical mechanisms that you can use to say that the password length has to be this much and that they have to use alphanumeric passwords and a special character. Make sure those things are turned on. Like in Office 365, Google G Suite, those things, they have those options. You just have to go in there and set them up. Don't use anything that's personal, nothing that's associated with you. Right? Don't use pet names. Don't use your birthdays. Don't use your favorite sports team. Don't put any of those things in there. Don't anything that you post on social media. Watch out for that. Right? Don't put anything that's don't use passwords that are associated with you in any way. Make sure and try your best to use a different password for every account. That's the hard one to do. Because it's easier to remember one password than trying to remember 10 passwords. But an alternative is that instead of trying to have to remember these passwords, use something like a password manager. And what the password manager is that you just have to remember one username and password, and then that gives you access to all your username and passwords for other accounts. But make sure that password manager, you're using a strong password that only you remember. But to help out with this is also to implement something called two-factor authentication. It's also known as multi-factor authentication, right? That's something you want to do because that adds an additional layer of protection. So instead of just a username and password, now you have something else that is going to be more difficult for someone to try to figure out or try to gain access to. So that something else is going to be something like a token. So if you've heard of Google Authenticator or RSA, so this is where it's basically like a 6-digit number that you have an application on your phone has a 6-digit number that every either 30 seconds or every minute that number sequence rotates and changes. It's a randomized number every minute. So when you log in, you put in your username, you put in your password, and you put in that 6-digit code, and then now you can get access to your system. Right? You could also have a verification code sent to your phone, and or biometrics, right? Like a lot of phones now have been doing face biometrics or fingerprint. They're switching back to fingerprint because masks apparently block access to your phone. So, don't just use a password, add something to it. Use a token. It's probably, token and biometrics are probably the two better ones. Token is probably the more the better one and more secure. Because fingerprint and face, it depends on the situation. Like, because someone could just take your phone and put it up to your face, and there you go. And fingerprint is actually somewhat secure as well. Verification code sent to your phone. There's different thoughts on that, but it is an option. If that's the only option you have, still use it, because at least there's another layer of protection that you have, right? Because those things are harder for an attacker to get, right? Getting your fingerprint is not something they're going to easily be able to do, right? They may have a picture of your face, but a lot of these biometric systems, the picture is not good enough. It has to be some sort of 3D aspect, right? Or they have to gain access to your phone in order to get this token or get the verification code that's sent to your phone. But that extra layer of defense gives you that extra layer of protection, which is something that you want. It makes it harder for them to get access or get into your system. They're going to move on to somebody else who doesn't have these things in place. So there is a website, haveibeenpwned.com. If you go to this website and you type in your email address, you can actually find out if there's anything that. So what it does, it'll let you know if your username or if that email address has been pwned or being compromised. So it'll actually go out and scare the internet for different sites where things like this would be posted, and they'll check to see is your email address there, and then what's the site that's associated with it. So it'll tell you if your Yahoo account was compromised. Hey, there's a Yahoo breach on this date. Make sure you have changed your password since. So this is a good site to just quickly check and see. So use all your email addresses on here just to check it. And then there's DNS security. So let me explain a little bit what this means. So first off, before we go into DNS security, let's explain what DNS is. So DNS stands for Domain Name System. And what that basically is the phone book of the internet. So the phone book of the internet, because what you basically have in a phone book, right, is name and numbers. Like right on your phone, you have your contact list. It's listed by name. Not very rarely is it listed by number. Why? Because it's easier for you to find the person's name and just press the person's name and it automatically dials the number for you, right? It's not too often many people will remember all the numbers of every single person that they have on their contact list. You may remember one or two, but you're not going to remember all of them. But it's the same thing with the internet, right? The internet, it's easier to remember a name like globalcyberalliance.org rather than me giving out a unique IP address. So a unique set of numbers, right? Because eventually those unique set of numbers are going to, you're going to get confused just like you would, if you were just to have a list of phone numbers and try to remember whose name is associated with that phone number. So if you have some sort of web presence, you're going to have a domain. If you have an email address, you have a domain. And this is where you basically have to go to a domain name registrar and register for one. So like GoDaddy, for example, is one registrar, HostGator is another one, and so on. So there's billions of domains that are out there, and it's estimated that about 200,000 plus new domains are registered daily across the globe. And about 70% of those could potentially be intended for malicious activity. This is based on Palo Alto Network's analysis and research. Right, because the idea is like, you have to read, if you're going to click on a link, you're clicking on a domain that you're getting access to. So they're going to have some sort of system set up with a domain name in order to host some sort of malicious type of activity. There's also websites that people register that are called lookalike domains or lookalike website domains. And the idea is with lookalike domains is kind of like what you do with passwords. So it's google.com and they put it in uppercase letters, but what they did was instead of O's, they used zeros. So it looks like Google, and that's why they purposely put it in caps, in capital letters, right? So it looks like it's Google, but when the O's actually are zeros. So it's a lookalike domain, right? So they'll tweak these little things, like, you know, sometimes instead of an M, it might be an R and an N. You know, those kinds of little things that they do to trick people to think that they're going to a legitimate site, but in reality they aren't. And there are various protection mechanisms that you can use, and that's where DNS security comes into place. So there's things like threat intelligence that are out there and checking all these kinds of things and looking at these types of attacks and seeing what kind of lookalike domains exist, which ones are malicious domains, and so on. And I'm not going to go, you know, too deep dive into the threat intelligence aspect of it, but let's focus on what you can use to protect yourself. Right. So one thing that you can use to protect yourself is something called Quad 9. And what Quad 9 does is basically you're using them as your DNS provider. So you're pointing all of your requests here. So anytime you're going to like a website or you're clicking on a link, the request goes to Quad 9 and say, hey, this is the domain I'm looking to access. What's the right IP address for this domain so I can connect to it? But what they'll do is say, hey, wait, this one here that you're trying to connect to is actually a bad domain. It's a malicious domain. So we're going to block access to it. So they're protecting you in that way. So that way you're not, you know, these are all the known malicious domains that they have. So Quad 9 uses a good number of threat intelligence providers to help them with this. And then, you know, and people also submit bad domains to them as well. So that way this stays up to date and it's continuously protecting people. So this will prevent all your computers, your devices, your IoT devices from connecting to bad domains, to malware, and it could potentially protect against malware and phishing sites as well when you have this and when you use something like this. So Quad 9 is actually can be used on any type of device. It could be a Macintosh, a Windows machine. You could put it on your router. There's an Android app for it as well, so you can download it on your Android phone. And install it on that so you can protect your phone from visiting malicious sites and malicious domains as well. So this is something, these are things that you can do. These are, you know, that most of these are tools that are already available to you that are on your systems. You just have to go through the process of implementing it. So just to give you, you know, so gcatoolkit.org is a site that you can go to where each of these categories are broken down, and you can see specifically what are some of the tools that you can use. So for example, like for backup, if you're using a Windows machine, it has built-in backup capabilities in there. You just have to back it up to an external device. Like if you're using a Mac and like a MacBook Pro, it has something called Time Machine, and you use Time Machine to do your backups for you. So there's different tools that you can use and different capabilities that are available to you on this gcatoolkit.org website to go ahead and go through and implement any tools that are associated with some of the stuff that we talked about today. So at this point, I'd like to open up to questions. I didn't see any questions yet.
One thing I just wanted to highlight for the group is that the resource that we're pointing you to is captioned as a toolkit for small businesses, but please don't be dissuaded or discouraged by the terminology. The resources apply regardless of whether you're even a large enterprise, and certainly do apply to nonprofits as well. So I think some of you all, just to bring things back to the local audience a tad bit, the ransomware, one of the vulnerabilities or attack methods that Shehzad mentioned is what Blackbaud was a victim of last year. And so perhaps some of you use Blackbaud services, and you know that there was a notice that went out to your organization as well as your potentially your donors as well and others with whom you're regularly engaging, notifying you that there was an incident. While they may seem like a prime target, it's important to recognize that it's really, in many cases, the larger fish are, sorry, my Slack is going nuts here. The larger fish are becoming less and less not less and less, but the less frequent targets, because there's been some regulations that have been passed that would probably leave out those organizations or discourage them from paying ransoms. But And because of that, ransomware, malicious actors, criminals are looking at smaller organizations who may be unfamiliar with the tactics that they're pursuing and therefore looking to victimize small organizations as well. So we really are keen to have questions. We're here as a resource. We want to be helpful. And I don't know if Laura, you had a question at one point, I think.
I think there is a question in the right now. It says we use web-based services that store donor information. How can we ensure they are secure as they can be and are using best practices?
It's a great question. So a lot of these web-based services do make sure that they have some level of security in place. I mean, so it depends on how you're using the service. So if you're the one who has access to it, because what they'll do is you could store the donor information in it, but they give you strictly access to you. So you use username and passwords, and they give you that section of their services just for your accessibility. So you make sure you have a strong, strong password in place. If they have two-factor capabilities, implement those two-factor capabilities. Another good thing is to check with some of these web-based services is that they'll actually tell you. They'll tell you some of the security certifications that they have been approved on and that they have set up within their environment. So those are some of the things that can help you to make a decision on those. If this is something that if this is a service that you maybe gone through a salesperson, maybe in the contract too, just make sure that they have some level of guarantee of integrity and safety of your systems, which again most web-based services actually do. But you may want to get it in writing just to have it.
If somebody was only going to do one of the multiple steps and tools and tips that you provided earlier, what would you recommend they do?
Only one of them. That's a tough question. I would probably say for sure to do two-factor authentication is definite, because that's one of the things that gives you basically, it could in essence be keys to the kingdom, right? If that password is not secure, not strong enough, at least you have the two-factor in place to protect protect against that weak password. But I would still probably put some of the other stuff at the same level though, to be honest. Like backup and recovery is probably just as important.
I think Shehzad mentioned this, but it's also important to highlight that most of these things are, you set them, it's almost a set it and forget it. We don't want you to forget that you've taken a device off of your network, or that you've, that some, particularly thinking also about when you have staff who've left the organization, you need to cut them off of the access to the organization. So that means you need to remove their email address from your network if they have, from your domain if they have one. So just like you would take away their keys physically, you need to take away every technical key that they might have access to the organization. But really, things like automatic backups, doing updates, the system, once you turn it on, the system will take care of it in most cases for you. Some of you are familiar with the little, I have an iPhone, so you're familiar with the little red dot that shows up on your settings, and so it's reminding you to update, and you will occasionally, depending on the nature of the organization, be reminded. But a lot of this is, it's in most cases, or many cases, Shehzad can correct me, a one-time investment, but it's one that pays dividends down the road. So it's really a savings of downtime for your organization should you become the victim, or one of your staff become the victim of an attack. And while it seems, I think it's I mentioned earlier, it's easy to think, oh, they're not interested in me. I don't have, we're a small organization. We don't have a huge amount of assets. We don't have many donors, et cetera, et cetera. It's unfortunately the case now that very few people are not of interest to criminals. They use automated tools to scan the internet for weak devices, and they'll use that to leverage their way into a number of types of organizations. So again, we're not trying to scare you, we're trying to empower you. So it's not hopeless. You just need to take a little bit of time to make some quick changes on the software settings and stay running.
Megan, earlier you mentioned a cost. What would be an expectation of an average annual expense to maintain data and keep information secure? In terms of like programs or services?
Shehzad runs our network for the organization that I work for, so I would kick the question over to him, but I would say in many cases it can be quite low depending on how sophisticated your network and your requirements are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an exact number, but it can be relatively low, especially for nonprofits. There's a lot of tools out there and a lot of services that they give like a certain number of licenses for free, up to a certain amount for free. You just need to take advantage of those types of situations, right? Like if you're using Office 365, for example, Office 365 has an Office 365 for nonprofits where they give you an X number of licenses for free. But they give you but it's still the full suite that they're giving you, right? So they're still giving you access to the same security levels and security capabilities. It's just a matter of taking advantage of those kinds of things. We're not for profit as well, so we've gone through a lot of those, and I look for those, tax exemption and all that to make sure that we're keeping our costs low and not spending an exorbitant amount of money, on our technologies that we're using.
That's great advice. I think everybody in the nonprofit world is appreciative of the savings and opportunities to have services at a reduced cost, especially those essential services like the ones you're describing and those that you offer with the cybersecurity toolkit.
I think too, you can also use the toolkit in some ways as a resource if you do have an IT outsourcer that supports your network. I would strongly urge you all to use the toolkit as a guide to say to them, I want to make sure that our network requires two-factor authentication for access to email. Certainly, I hope, for those who are managing payroll and HR, those are prime areas for those individuals are prime targets for phishing attempts. So again, the phishing email is trying to click on a link. So oftentimes they are Excel spreadsheets that will say, pick on Gloria and Laura. Like Laura sends her a note and says, here's the list of invitees, or here's a list of donors. We've got all these contributions, and it turns out that it's actually a phishing email. And by that, by her opening the file, it gives them an entry point to SCP, in this case, SCP and CCF. Or I guess they're technically wanting to say, I know the admin is the same, but in many cases, some of you are maybe familiar or maybe recall. More years ago than I'd like to remember, Target was the victim of a data breach, and that happened actually through the HVAC system. So it's not always you that's the goal, you're the stepping stone. Criminals are quite, well, they've earned their reputation for a number of reasons, including that they are quite crafty at achieving their objectives. So.
There's another question.
Oh, I was just about to say that, great.
So we currently keep email accounts live for 1 year after an employee leaves and change the password so someone else can monitor the account. Would you recommend we stop that practice? It depends on the account that you're giving access to. I mean, if it's a critical account, because it can make sense, right? If it's a financial officer that's being replaced, it makes sense that the new financial officer needs the old financial officer's email just to be able to make sure that that you're keeping in sync with whomever they like auditing and purposes and things like that. So it's a practice you should still keep an account, but make sure that when you give access to that person, that not only do they reset the password, but they also keep using the two-factor authentication, right? So now they're gonna have two tokens, which will be a little bit more difficult for them, but it is something that that they would need to do, just again to keep that account protected. But then don't forget after that year to make sure that if that account is no longer necessary or needed, to get disable that account and suspend the account. It's actually quite a common practice as of late.
I don't see any other questions, and we're getting close on time. So if there aren't any other questions, maybe we'll want to point out that there's a handout available for everyone on the webinar today. Feel free to print it out, download it, etc. We will send that out as well with the recording, or the link to the recording rather, of today's webinar. And again, if you would please take a few minutes and fill out the survey that you'll receive tomorrow, we would all really appreciate it. Really big thanks to Megan and Shehzad for all their time and expertise today. Oops, I think we see one more question, or maybe it's a comment. I'll let you guys look while I just finish up and say thanks again to Megan and Shehzad for presenting and sharing all of the great tips and tools and for making the toolkit available to everyone. I know that it will be a great tool, literally, in everyone's cybersecurity toolbox. And big thanks to Dominion Energy, as always, for their generous sponsorship of the L.E.A.D program. We look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Oh, now you have 2 more questions, so I'll just put it back to you guys. Sorry.
I can't see them, so if somebody can, or maybe Shehzad can read them out. Or Laura.
Yeah, let me see. Okay, it says, for nonprofits, do you think it's a worthwhile investment to have a paid staff person versus volunteer as tech support to cover cybersecurity?
My reaction, and Shehzad would be that, you know, if it's probably not, depending on the size of your organization, it may not be a full-time job, so perhaps it can just be an assigned duty. And I think it depends on the nature of the volunteer. If there's someone with significant expertise, maybe, but if it is an assigned task of someone who's paid, it then becomes a part of their review, and it perhaps may give them more interest in making sure that they also execute those duties. Shehzad, what are your thoughts?
You know, I agree. I mean, another option could be also, I mean, there are managed service providers out there that could potentially be at a lower cost than having a paid staff or even a volunteer. So that's another option to take into consideration as well.
And did you say there was another question, Laura?
It was a couple comments thanking you guys for the very valuable information, and then a comment about the Experian breach and how it impacted millions, and it remains wise to lock your credit, that threat to personal finance is a 20-year problem, super easy to open and close it for purchases or pulls too, and entirely worth it, and then a thank you.
Well, thank you all for inviting us and for your attention, and we are always around, so you have our contact information.
Great, thank you, and thank you all for the questions. Sorry if I tried to end too early. That was not my intention. Always trying to be respectful of everyone's time. So Megan and Shehzad, again, thank you both so much. This was great. And everyone who is here today, Gloria and I and the rest of our colleagues at Coastal Community Foundation really appreciate your time and attention. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you all so much.